that occurs through globalization and other sorts of processes. And if that's the case, if corruption is really simply an interpenetration of traditional forms of life into more modern economic frameworks in the most common formulation, does that mean that we can no longer attach a value to corruption? Or if there is such a value, where does that value come from? Is there some sort of, do you have or do you posit some kind of value framework in relation to which we can identify a particular practice as always and inevitably being corrupt?
There are two elements. Very important question. Two elements here. One element is disproportionate appropriation of common goods. I call it corruption. You have common goods. You use an instrument that is in your hand in order to appropriate disproportionately compared to what has had to be your part of the common goods. You appropriate much more. That's corruption. You were supposed to have $200,000 salaries. You organize yourself in order to get 2 million. And your work is not worse than 250,000. So the part of the common goods that you are taking away of the society as our wealth at any given time is defined, limited. So if people who are in place of decision making extract more from the society that is their due part than what is left for the society in order to, in all its differences, conflict, etc., to our access can become much more limited. And these corruptions are astronomical in some places of the world. A guy appropriated $2.8 billion in a society that I know as an intermediary of a state corporation. $2.8 billion. And they created 4 banks, which are fake banks, one in country X, one in country Y, and operations are being here and there. There is not single money in these banks. They are only covering this fraudulent action of extracting from common goods 2 billion. It is one case. I can name you tens of cases. So this is corruption. And everybody knows the story. Everybody knows that this guy, through a process of dishonest accounting system, has extracted from common good amounts that could change lives of millions of people. This is one aspect of corruption. The level of access that we have to common goods because of our political position. And this is purely political position. The second element, which is cultural, is your value system. If you would go to Melbourne or the whole Australia and ask how many people, what's your name?
Christina.
But how many people agree with values of Christine? Maybe it will be 12% of the population. And Christina has all this group, the green clothes, red matraque group, and they walk in the street and they say, who does not agree with Christian values? This is another corruption. It's not the position, the cultural, the value system of Christian in the society is at all non-irrelated to the real adhesion, acceptance of this value system by social strata. So the two levels of political power interfering in what is your value system position in the society, if you use it by oppression. So in some places, I don't know, there is no statistic the real data. What percent of Western Chinese population, in Western China, Chinese population, do agree with this policy of Chinese Communist Party? Every once in a while, some terrorists are executed. And it's so funny that in China, since 1949, we have homegrown terrorism in western part of China to the extent that Chinese Communist Party feels the necessity to execute them. Should the label of terrorist be enough for us to explain what is happening there? So I think a certain value system is trying to impose itself. And this imposition of value system is through very often very violent processes and sometimes even very soft. Is television. Television program which only the content that is diffused belong to the content of thought and value system of 6, 7, 10% of the population. So these two elements are the elements of corruption. They are the elements of the corruption because I define corruption as extracting resources disproportionate to who I am, who we are. As a person, as 10%, as 20% of the population with a certain value system, I should have 1/5 of TV time. My value system is 20% of the population. If I have the whole TV time program, if I dictate the whole educational system, then they're extracting too much of resources of the society.
To take that point one step further, could you elaborate, Modjtaba, on what is it about the age of globalization that is intensifying these elements of your definition of corruption, and haven't these kinds of processes, also you were talking before about people not knowing who they are and about value systems, haven't these processes always been at play? What is it about the age of globalization that exacerbates these elements of struggle with value system and with what you're defining as corruption?
Globalization, all of it is not bad. There are some elements of globalization I like. In average, I am walking 6 hours a day in Melbourne. I cross the distance between North Melbourne to South West Melbourne through different trajectory, and I have a good social observer. I have a long tradition to observe. I have seen something fascinating. First of all, a critic towards representation of Australia in the world. It's so funny how much this society is not in the world. You have so many good things. Before these months, I never, ever read anywhere about Australian culture, society, good things. It's fascinating. You're walking in the streets, in your walks in the street, I'm talking urban, 2014, Melbourne, okay? I am not making a historical point. Your bodies are so comfortable, men and women. I don't feel you are here stressed because of your body. There is not social pressure on your body. There is no sexual pressure on your body. People are very comfortable with their body. This is fascinating. This is not a normal setting of the planet, a major city body presence. The second element, I have told this to my friends, they said, you should write your diaries and make it a book. And I tell you, you correct me please, I have a we commit only the crimes that we can. I am optimistic. I have observed in the city so many Australian men or European descendant Australian men taking care of their kids, hugging, the baby car pushing. Do you know what is fascinating? In the process of globalization and enculturation, I have seen many Asian men hugging their kids, pushing the baby car, which would not happen in many Asian societies. No, the woman would carry the baby. You have seen in many places there.
Well, it's interesting you say that because whenever I'm in Sweden, I make the same observation. I think in Australia, you never see men pushing prams.
We were in the brown market. I made this statement, and we were a group of friends, and every man who came, he was carrying his family.
The shoemaker walks
and
down
they thought that I had bribed people to come and to make a demonstration of my argument. But I see the effect. So I lived 20 years in Japan. In last year, as I was in Japan, I saw slowly the coming of men on Sundays to the park with the children. Slowly they came after a very, very complex process of social cultural changes. So in China, even if the child is boy, you don't have very, very often this setting, this woman who is carrying. In India, it's the same. And here, they're from parents of South Asian continent behavior, parents of East Asian characters. You see very often, and this is an enculturation that I consider very positive. Is a factor of globalization that I consider being very positive. And the fact that this well-being with body encompasses all ethnic, all people, independent from their color, etc. If you're Asian, you're as well comfortable as you are European descent. And this is because of a certain fight, struggle, social struggles have been done. This is a result of it, this is an outcome of cultural transformation that women have done here. This is my reading of why this has become possible by this. This aside, so I wanted to say any changes that happen because of the process of interculture in global area is not negative. There are the factor of corruption. Multinational corporations, when they come to the societies, they have one target: to make segment of this society out of the control of the population of that society. I repeat, multinational corporations, when they come to a society, they have one target: to take out segment of that society out of the control of that society. That segment could be raw material, could be labor, could be anything. So multinational corporations come to a behavior in the process of globalization that in fact becomes a dual oppression. An oppression within the territory of action of multinational corporations, other within the general territory of the country where the political elite is extracting resources. And this process of pressure by multinational corporations, and considering these, there are multinational corporations which do not act in that way, but there are those which act in this way. Because I have to say there are multinational corporations that their behavior is much better than the laws of the country. I have done field work of multinational corporations which they gave support for labor above the level that the laws of the country would give support for it. What I'm trying to do is de-essentialize our reading of actors. A multinational as an actor could act in affecting a certain enculturation. A multinational corporations could act in creating a certain acculturation. Both of them are happening simultaneously. So when the multinational corporation acts in creating acculturation, in that context, what is most important, most interesting, is prevents any support network to be able to interact in the territory of multinational corporations. Unions are disbanded. You cannot have union in the, if it is related to manpower, you cannot unionize your corporation, your labor. If it is in the territory of mining, everything is done that to that part you cannot go. Cars cannot go, it becomes a forbidden territory, etc., etc. And this extraction of part of the society from social control, and this is what I said in convergence with your argument, the major process of what is at stake in 2014 and coming years is, for me, are the decision making, are the issues connected to the society and possibility of social control, social interaction with them, or they are extracted out of the society for any reasons that the group can define itself privileged, better, higher, is reserved for that. In some places is in the name of religion, in some places in the name of expertise, in some places in the name of belonging, etc.
So we had a question here.
I was interested in what you're saying about mobile phones. Do you think that everyone interacts with that kind of technology in the same way around the world and it creates like a global culture? Or are we still being really segmented depending on our nationality?
The solution that we are having for is segmentation, is ghettoization. But the immediate solution. But the work that is being done by pharmaceutical industry and by wider NGO, world NGOs, first is to find treatment, and second is to render treatment accessible. These two are beyond segmentation. So, as you know, in pharmaceutical industry, there has been for any major health issue two positions. One is to make the medicine, the medicament, source of revenue. Other is first work for healing. And if the people who have to pay cannot pay it, the issue has become how to render it accessible. This was for HIV in 1980s and 1990s, a big argument. And now for Ebola, some element of treatment have been discovered, and the issue is, should be dispensed broadly, widely, globally, or should we keep segmented? And if you have seen in the news, those who have been ghettoized, they are resisting this ghettoization. They are fighting against this ghettoization. They counter-argue about this. They are pushing for a wide approach to the issue.
I just wanted to follow up on one of your comments before. I really like hearing about this observational approach you take to new cities and things like that. And it's exciting to hear your observations about Australia's place in the world. But you said about, your comment was, or maybe wanting you to follow up on the comment you were talking about, people in the streets of Melbourne don't seem to carry this sort of physical weight of various kinds of like what you described as sexual pressure. But to my mind, I mean, and I could be wrong, so I'm interested in the broader context, but to my mind there is that here, but it's to do with an internalization of particular, like we could probably call the masculine gaze, and it manifests in a range of things, but things like perhaps anorexia, body dysmorphia, and things like that. Do you see that as being less visible or somehow different from your observation?
I have to say, I'm really glad you asked that question. I wanted to ask something similar because I think the body is always being disciplined in different ways, and I definitely can't accept the argument that that's not happening.
Well, I wanted to hear what your perspective was, but before I choose to accept or not accept.
I do agree with you that the body is constantly disciplined. This is a premise. But we have different layers of disciplinarization. We have different levels of disciplinarization. What you say is interiorization, yes, but it's also, there is exteriority. There is, gay couples are much freer in the streets of Melbourne, this part of the Melbourne that I have walked many times. And this is an exteriorization which is freer than London, freer than Paris. The body is much more itself as it wants to exteriorize itself. Is this in contradiction to have discipline? No, there is disciplinarization. Of course, there is red light. Everybody push the button. It's so disciplined. I think you are maybe third after Switzerland. Very disciplined is great. But this disciplinarization at the same time is very easily people sit at the corner of the street and chat. Sit on the floor and chat and maybe eat something. Very easily. In London, you don't see this. Would be in the park, not the corner of the street. The relations that you have with street musicians. And they have with you. And the dialogue that you establish is not just in a tube station in London who people pass and drop a coin. It's a dialogue going on. And these, because my level of analysis is micro, at micro level, these are very important. That musician is taken seriously, though he's a street singer. And there are not only tourist people who sat around and watch. There are many local people who enjoy. I think it's down there. Every time of the day you pass, different people are presenting an art. And these street arts have good qualities and have spectators. They watch them, they interact with them, they talk to them, and they pay. And I think this is important. It's important in the sense that if art can come to music, to the street, that could become an element of enculturation. So the body encompasses all of these dimensions. The body is not only sexual, these were first assessed the body. If you can freely sit on the corner of the street and listen to a duo guitar player, later I show you the picture, I take them with my camera, and there were two guitarists playing so beautiful, both guitar and they had beautiful voice. Or this gentleman who makes painting on the floor of the street, etc., etc. This is a common element. Certainly there is regulation. Certainly they have to have a permit from somebody to stand there, etc. Certainly there is discipline. But nevertheless, the body of watchers is very different here than in München or in Hamburg.
I guess it depends on comparisons between contexts as well. Wherever recently spent time always filters where you go next, and I think, you know, make the same sorts of observations when I'm in Latin America, and I always think, you know, everybody walks in such a stiff way, you know, in Australia as compared with here. Nobody plays music spontaneously on the street. But then, if I come from, I always feel very physically constrained for no tangibly obvious reason whenever I'm in the airport in Dubai. But if I go past there to go to Rio, then suddenly my body relaxes again. And maybe that's particularly as a woman, I suddenly relax again when I'm in the queue to go enter a plane with Brazilians all around me. So maybe there's a...
Totally, I agree. Contextualization is very important, but there is one element in it that might be important. For me, culture changes. You have to look at the process, how it evolves. In Latin America, it used to be always like this. Latin Americans, the popular culture was in the street. Since Batista, Cuba, music is in the street. With Castro is in the street. Today is in the street. The music was in the street. It has been regulated somehow, but it is in the street. In Chile is the same. In Mexico is the same. But in Melbourne, music was in the streets. 20 years ago, what is the pattern of cultural change? How is it evolving? You are talking about the body posture. Yes, at 5 p.m., I have seen this crazy speed of people leaving offices. Men and women. They are in run. You know, you look at this and I look at this and I say, certainly the kid is in kindergarten, they want to go before the responsible of kindergarten bothers them, or they have an evening class, they want to reach, or that Swanson Street on the sides of the after the Victoria Art Center, over there, when these corporations employees come out, is fascinating. The stress with which they are running. And half an hour later, nobody's in the street anymore. Becomes no man's land. In 20 minutes, half an hour, this speed of it, yes, I have seen, and I agree with you, this is discrimination. But from the pattern of culture change is based on duration. In a length of time, I think 10 years is good. Would you say 10 years ago these streets of Melbourne were as relaxed as they are today?
I wasn't here 10 years ago.
Anybody has been here in Melbourne 10 years ago? Nobody? Okay, I will interview some Melbournians to ask.
Well, on that note, I'd like you to join me again to thank If anybody would like to continue the conversation, you're welcome to email Modjtaba. And thank you once again. I look forward to seeing you at the next seminar.